The void of space stretched without end, a silent abyss interrupted only by the distant glow of stars. But beneath its quiet facade, an old order trembled. For centuries, the Galactic Council had maintained authority, a network of treaties and decrees woven together like a fragile web. It had held, not through unity, but through control, subjugation disguised as order. But power was never absolute, and cracks had begun to form. One name rippled through the galaxy, whispered in war rooms and back-channel transmissions alike: Earth. In the heart of Irindra Prime, where the Council convened within a colossal chamber of polished obsidian and hovering laser plasma displays, the weight of that name pressed against every delegate present. The amphitheater pulsed with discussion, filled with representatives from dozens of empires. Crystalline forms reflected the overhead lights, insectoid figures twitched their mandibles in agitation, and serpentine beings coiled tighter as debate swelled. At the center of it all, General Kranos of the Royan Empire stood, his scaled knuckles pressed against the obsidian podium before him. His emerald eyes burned as he addressed the gathered assembly. They were primitive, barely holding on to existence on that death trap of a world, he snarled, voice coiling through the chamber like smoke. Now their ships roam unrestricted through neutral zones. Their technology, he gestured toward a hovering projection, defies convention, and we did nothing while they outgrew us. The Council's presiding figure, an elder of the Ziran Dominion, observed in silence. His metallic robes reflected the shifting hues of the data streams surrounding him. A Farron diplomat, whose translucent form pulsed faintly with shifting blues, exhaled sharply. And yet, General, no violations of law have been recorded. Humanity has not broken a single treaty. His voice was measured, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of concern. They mock us, Kranos spat. They tread our space without permission. A species barely out of its own gravity, should not be capable of matching our fleets. The council leader finally spoke, his tone the weight of centuries. Enough. This chamber does not function on emotion. Facts only. The laser plasma projection above them shifted, replacing the debate summaries with an image that silenced the room. A sleek, black vessel, angular and featureless, gliding through neutral space. Its hull reflected no light, absorbing sensors as if it did not exist. A ship of impossible make, human-made. Murmurs spread, then hardened into a collective sense of unease. This, the council leader continued, was intercepted near the Vrix trade corridor. It engaged no one. It responded to no hails. It disappeared before pursuit ships could track it. A silence stretched, one that did not need to be spoken aloud. What has Earth become? A delegate from the Zenari Dominion, his sharp avian features unreadable, clicked his beak. The humans were beneath notice for so long, we never considered they could evolve outside our oversight. It seems we were mistaken. Kranos' patience snapped. We cannot sit idle. If we allow them to continue unchecked, they will disrupt everything we've built. The council leader's gaze cut through the room. What do you propose? Kranos straightened. An immediate show of force, a preemptive strike? If we hesitate, they will only strengthen. A few murmurs of assent. Others hesitated, shifting in their seats. War with a species they did not fully understand? A low, measured voice rose from the upper tiers. The humans have spent centuries fighting only themselves, said a delegate from the Ivar Consortium, his golden eyes unreadable. War is in their blood. If we give them one, are we certain we will win? For the first time, Kranos hesitated. The council leader considered this, his features impassive. Then, finally, he spoke the words that would change the course of history. Humanity has stepped beyond its bounds. They will be put back in their place. A motion was passed. A fleet was authorized. The decision once made could not be undone. Across the void, hidden beneath layers of reinforced rock and steel, Earth's command bunker pulsed with quiet activity. Screens cast a cold blue glow over the room, illuminating the faces of officers and analysts seated at their stations. Every flickering display told a story of motion. Satellite feeds tracking distant disturbances, intercepted transmissions marked for review. At the center of it all, Commander Alexander Voss leaned over the primary tactical display, his fingers resting against the console's edge. His uniform was devoid of unnecessary ornamentation, function over vanity. Everything about him, from the sharp angles of his face to the unwavering focus in his gaze, reflected the reality of the world he commanded. Lieutenant Dorian Vex, standing at his side, handed him a datapad. "We intercepted a series of transmissions." His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it. "The Council has convened. We're at the center of it." Voss scanned the text. The pieces were falling into place. He had spent too long waiting for inevitability to arrive. "They're coming," he said at last. It wasn't a question. Vex exhaled. "The Council's decision is sealed. Our observation vessel spooked them. They think we're hiding more." A flicker of something close to amusement crossed Voss's face. "They're right." Silence stretched between them. Not the silence of uncertainty, but of calculation. "They'll send an envoy first," Voss said, setting the datapad down. "A diplomat, maybe a scout. They need to confirm their fears before they move." Vex studied the display. "And when they do?" Voss turned, his voice quiet but absolute. "We let them see just enough to think they understand, but not enough to realize the truth. The truth. That Earth had rebuilt itself in the shadows, hidden beneath layers of misdirection and secrecy. That humanity had learned, time and again, that survival was never granted, only earned. A technician across the room spoke, his tone clipped. "Commander, we have a contact. Unidentified object entering the outer system. Trajectory aligns with Council space." Voss's gaze narrowed. "ETA?" 72 hours. "Visual," Voss ordered. A display flickered, then sharpened. A Council envoy ship, sleek and gilded in diplomatic arrogance, drifting toward them. Vex exhaled, a slight smirk ghosting his lips. How kind of them. Voss didn't smile. His eyes remained locked on the screen, the weight of inevitability pressing against the room. "They're not here to talk," he said. "They're here to measure us." The envoy ship continued its course. Earth did not answer. The Council envoy ship cut through the darkness, its hull glinting with artificial luster as it approached Earth's gravity well. To the untrained eye, it moved with the grace of diplomacy, a vessel of reason, bearing envoys draped in ceremonial finery. But Earth's eyes were not untrained. This was not a visit. It was a probe. In the command bunker, buried beneath reinforced layers of steel and composite shielding, Commander Alexander Voss watched the laser plasma display as the alien vessel drew closer. A stillness settled over the room, broken only by the quiet calculations of analysts tracking its descent. Lieutenant Dorian Vex stood beside him, arms folded. "They expect us to welcome them, give them the grand tour. They expect a world still desperate for recognition," Voss replied. His voice was calm, yet something colder lurked beneath it. "They'll find something else." A junior officer turned from his station. "The ship is entering lower orbit. They're transmitting a standard diplomatic greeting." "Let them talk," Voss said, stepping back from the display. "We'll answer when it suits us." Vex's mouth twitched. "I doubt they're used to being ignored." "They're used to control," Voss corrected. "That ends today." The envoy's descent was slow, deliberate. Every motion, every adjustment of its flight path was calculated to radiate authority. It skimmed over the oceans, reflective panels capturing the light of Earth's sun in a shimmering display. Below, its passage was noted, but not welcomed. In cities, people looked up, some with curiosity, some with quiet understanding. In the fields outside the Rockies, where the ship's final approach vector led, small clusters of observers gathered, soldiers, analysts, and those who had spent their lives preparing for moments like this. Inside the bunker, the primary display sharpened, showing the envoy's landing. Voss studied the scene carefully. "Theatrics," Vex said, watching as the ship's landing struts extended. "Slow descent, exaggerated control. They want this to feel like an event." "They don't realize," Voss said, eyes locked on the screen. "They are not the event." The ship touched down with mechanical finality. Hydraulic pressure hissed through its landing gear. Then a pause, an unspoken demand that Earth acknowledge them first. Voss let the silence stretch. Seconds passed, then minutes. Finally, the ship's hatch opened. A ramp extended, too slow to be anything but deliberate. 3 figures emerged. Their garments shimmered with woven circuitry, shifting through bands of light as they descended. The leader, tall and reed-thin, walked with measured steps, as if the very act of standing on Earth was a display of restraint. Behind them, armored sentinels flanked the sides of the ramp, silent observers of a world they had never set foot on before. Voss turned from the display. "Let's not keep them waiting." The mountain air was cold, crisp in a way the envoys could not possibly be accustomed to. The weight of gravity here was different. The bite of real atmosphere, unfiltered, unsterilized. A world that had shaped its inhabitants through hardship, not privilege. Voss walked toward them, accompanied by a small but unmistakable contingent. Not a show of force, but a statement. These were not guards, not politicians. They were soldiers. Men who had spent their lives preparing for the moment diplomacy would no longer matter. The lead envoy stopped as Voss approached, his dark, reflective gaze unreadable. His voice, however, carried the familiar weight of authority. "Commander Alexander Voss." It was not quite a question, not quite a greeting. A testing of waters. Voss didn't offer a handshake. "You came uninvited." The envoy's head tilted slightly. "We came in good faith, seeking clarity." His clipped enunciation betrayed something beneath the smooth exterior. Frustration. Number expectation. They were accustomed to deference. Voss let the silence stretch before speaking. "You traveled a long way for something you could have asked over a transmission." The envoy's lips barely moved. "Some matters require direct discussion." Voss held his ground. "And which matter is that?" A flicker of something passed through the envoy's gaze, there and gone in an instant. "Your species' recent activities have raised concerns. The Council seeks to understand your intentions." Voss's expression didn't change. "Our intentions are simple. We exist. We endure." The envoy's features remained passive, but the shift was there, a slight recalibration, as though this response was unexpected. "Your technological advancements suggest otherwise," the envoy said. "Your vessels patrol neutral space. Your defenses, once insignificant, have grown formidable." Voss met his gaze, unwavering. "Survival demands adaptation. You of all people should understand that." A moment of silence. Then, the envoy's tone shifted. "The Council values peace, Commander. But should peace be threatened, understand this. There are precedents. Others before you have defied the order of the galaxy. They did not last." Voss stepped closer, the weight of his presence undeniable. "Then it's a good thing," he said evenly. "We are not like them." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty touched the envoy's expression. It was gone just as quickly. Behind them, the sentinels remained motionless, unreadable statues of restraint. But restraint did not mean absence of intent. The envoy exhaled, adjusting his stance. This visit is not a threat. It is an opportunity, a chance to prevent what neither of us wants. Voss let the words linger, let the offer remain in the air just long enough for the envoy to believe it still held weight. Then finally he spoke. "You came here to measure us," he said, voice even. "Take your measurements, then leave." Something in the envoy's posture stiffened. The smallest of shifts, a realization that control had slipped through his fingers. "This conversation is not over," he said. Voss's reply was cold, final. "You're right. The next one won't be with words." The envoy studied him for a moment longer. Then, without another word, he turned, retreating up the ramp. The sentinels followed. The moment the last of them had disappeared inside, the hatch sealed. A minute later, the ship rose into the sky, a retreat disguised as dignity. Vex exhaled, stepping beside Voss. That could have gone worse. Voss watched the ship disappear into the upper atmosphere. His voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking its weight. Number it couldn't have. They both knew what came next. The Council had their answer. They would choose war, and when they did, humanity would teach them the meaning of it. The Council envoy ship was gone, leaving nothing behind but the fading contrails of its ascent. The sky over the Rockies returned to its usual stillness, but for the men standing on the rocky plain below, the moment lingered. Commander Alexander Voss turned back toward the bunker, his jaw set like a man bracing for the next move in a long and unforgiving game. Lieutenant Dorian Vex fell into step beside him, casting one last glance at the empty sky. "They'll waste no time," Vex muttered. Voss nodded. "And neither will we." The bunker doors sealed behind them, cutting off the cold mountain air. Inside, the air was tense with readiness. Technicians moved with measured urgency, their stations bathed in the shifting glow of laser plasma displays, tracking off-world activity. "Status on the envoy?" Voss asked as he reached the command platform. A communications officer turned from his display. "Their ship just cleared lunar orbit. Based on telemetry, they're pushing full burn toward Irindra Prime." "Good," Voss said. "That means they're running." Vex exhaled, adjusting the straps on his wrist console. "You think they'll go straight to the Council?" "They won't wait," Voss said. "By the time they arrive, the discussion won't be about diplomacy. It'll be about retaliation." He turned to strategic control, where Captain Elias Ward leaned over a tactical interface, scrutinizing fleet formation data. Voss walked over. "Time to put Earth on war footing," Voss said. Ward didn't look up. "Already started." The envoy ship pierced the amber skies of Irindra Prime, its sleek hull reflecting the glow of the capital's spire-lined skyline. It descended through controlled flight corridors before locking onto the central citadel's docking bay. Inside the chamber, the Council was already in session. The air pulsed with tension as representatives from dozens of species debated over shifting laser displays that mapped trade routes, disputed sectors, and military holdings. Humanity had been a footnote on those maps for centuries. Now that was changing. As the envoy stepped onto the chamber floor, the voices dropped to murmurs, then silence. The Council leader, an elder of unreadable age, studied the envoy's rigid posture. "Speak." The envoy's tone was clipped, his words measured but laced with something deeper. "Humanity has outgrown its station. They did not greet us as subjects. They did not speak as equals. They spoke as something else." He gestured, and a projected display flickered to life, replaying the exchange on Earth. Voss's final words echoed through the chamber. The Council chamber erupted. "Unacceptable. They reject our authority. They would dare posture before us?" The murmurs built into an argument of clashing voices, but one cut through the noise, General Krenos of the Royan Empire. His scaled fingers tapped against the curved console before him as he watched the replay again, eyes narrowing. "This," he said, "is defiance." The council leader raised a hand. Silence followed. "Their defiance," she said, "must be answered." "The council will send a fleet," Vex said. "They have no other choice." Voss studied the fleet display, where Earth's ships patrolled strategic locations, moving in calculated rotations. There was no fleet massing for invasion, no great war machine visible to the stars. That was intentional. "They expect us to react like prey," Voss said. "We won't." Ward folded his arms. "You expect them to strike first?" "They won't risk a full assault yet," Voss said. "The council never acts without posturing first. They'll send something smaller, a show of strength before the real fight begins." Vex smirked. "So they'll test us?" Voss nodded. "And they'll get their answer." A transmission pinged through the main channel. An officer snapped to attention. "Commander," he called. "Unidentified vessels detected at the system's edge, matching Council strike force patterns." Voss walked to the primary interface. His fingers tapped a command, magnifying the data feed. There they were. 3 Council warships, slipping out of FTL at the edges of the system. Their scanning pulses swept the sector like hounds, sniffing for weakness. Voss turned to the room. "Everyone in position." Aboard the Council flagship, Admiral Karos watched the display with narrowed eyes. The human system looked unchanged. Too unchanged. "This is wrong," his tactical officer murmured. "Where's their fleet?" Karos exhaled through his secondary vents, irritation creeping into his voice. "They are undisciplined, primitive. They do not know how to respond to this." His eyes flicked across the sensor grid. Nothing moved beyond the usual planetary patrols. No fleet shifting into position. No panic. And that was exactly what disturbed him. "Deploy probes," Karos ordered. "Map the orbital defenses." The order was relayed. Small observation drones launched, streaking toward Earth like silent messengers. Inside the command bunker, an officer turned from his console. "They're probing our defenses." Voss nodded, already expecting it. He turned to Captain Ward. "You're up." Ward stepped forward, activating the response grid. Across Earth's upper atmosphere, long dormant stations blinked awake. Jamming nodes designed to create sensor ghosts and distort enemy telemetry pulsed with raw interference. Up in orbit, the Council's observation drones were blinded. Aboard the Council flagship, Karos's tactical officer stiffened. "Sir, our probes. Something's wrong." Karos's head snapped toward the display where his drone's feeds turned to static. Then something else happened. Earth's satellites, silent for decades, moved, not away, toward them. Karos barely had time to react before the countermeasures activated. A targeted energy disruption field pulsed from Earth's orbital platforms, cascading outward in calculated waves. The Council ship's navigation interfaces flickered. Guidance systems faltered. Earth had blinded them. Inside the bunker, Voss watched the Council fleet drift for the briefest moment in uncertainty. Then he gave the order. "Now." From hidden launch platforms, a wave of autonomous hunter drones launched, locking onto the Council warships with relentless calculation. The first explosion bloomed against a warship's aft stabilizers, knocking it off course. The second found a vulnerable heat sink, sending cascading failures through the ship's cooling network. On board the Council flagship, Karos stumbled forward, catching himself against the command rail. "Counterattack!" he barked. His officers scrambled, but the battlefield was already set. Inside the bunker, Voss leaned forward, watching the carnage unfold. "They thought we were standing still," he muttered. Vex smirked. "They just realized we were waiting." The Council fleet, its ships damaged, its sensors blinded, began to retreat. Their arrival had been meant as a warning. Instead, they were the ones being taught a lesson. Voss turned from the display, his gaze unreadable. They'll be back, Ward muttered. Yes, Voss said, his voice firm. But next time, they won't come to test us. They'll come to end us. And when they did, they'd learn what it meant to fight Earth on its terms. Part 4. The Council's Verdict. The Council fleet limped away, its ships scorched and riddled with damage. What was meant to be a display of strength had collapsed into an unanticipated retreat. Back in the command bunker, Commander Alexander Voss stood at the central display, watching the laser plasma projections chart the remnants of the enemy's fleet. He didn't look satisfied. Captain Elias Ward folded his arms. They'll twist this into a justification. Play the victim. Say we ambushed them. They will, Voss said, his expression unchanging. But it won't matter. Lieutenant Dorian Vex glanced at him. Why not? Because the Council was never waiting for proof, Voss said. They were waiting for an excuse. The chamber was a storm of unruly voices. Representatives of dozens of species shouted over each other, their displays flashing fleet reports, damage assessments, and intercepted transmissions from the failed incursion into Sol. At the Council's center, General Krenos of the Royan Empire stood in front of the main tribunal, his reptilian jaw tight with frustration. You see, he spread his clawed hands wide. We approached them with measured force, and they responded with destruction. They are not just a problem, they are a threat. A Farron delegate, his form flickering with bioluminescent waves, scoffed. A threat, you say? Perhaps it was a warning. Warnings do not disable warships, Krenos growled. From the tribunal, the council leader raised her hand, commanding silence. The chamber dimmed, and a tactical playback unfolded in the air between them. A replay of the battle at the system's edge. Ships struck blind, maneuvering erratically. Drones swarming like hunting birds, crippling them before they could fight back. The council leader's gaze swept the room. Tell me what you see. The room hesitated. The implications were clear, but no one wished to be the first to voice them. It was Admiral Keros, the defeated council fleet commander, who finally spoke. They were prepared. He clenched his jaw, forcing the words out. Their defenses were deliberate, their countermeasures, not reactive. They knew we were coming. Krenos turned on him. Are you implying they expected our attack? They didn't expect it, Keros said. They knew it was inevitable. A murmur spread across the room. The unspoken realization was dawning. Earth was not some primitive world struggling to catch up. Earth had been planning for this for years. The council leader's voice cut through the noise. Then the question is no longer whether they are a threat. She let the silence settle. Then, the question is whether they can be stopped. The council's response came 3 hours later. A system-wide transmission from Arindra Prime reached Earth, delivered in the formal cadence of war declarations. Ward read the text on the central display, his face impassive. For the preservation of galactic order, humanity is to be neutralized, all operations to commence immediately. Voss absorbed it without a flicker of emotion. They're committing everything then, Vex said, running a hand along his jaw. Voss exhaled. Of course they are. A ping interrupted them. A secondary alert. Earth's deep space tracking stations had detected a mass mobilization of ships. Voss turned to the strategic display, where red markers flooded the outer edges of the Sol system. They're already moving, Ward muttered. Vex frowned. That fast? They've been waiting for this moment for years, Voss said. Same as us. He straightened, his tone shifting from analysis to command. We need every defensive system online, battle stations at full readiness. I want satellite deployments recalibrated to intercept the first wave before it hits orbit. Ward was already moving. I'll have the ironclad Dawn fully prepped within the hour. Voss nodded. Good. Vex hesitated. And if they bring their full armada? Voss glanced at the tactical map, where thousands of ships were beginning their approach. His expression remained unreadable. Then we show them why Earth still stands. At the vanguard of the approaching armada, Admiral Nyros stood at the helm of his flagship, the Oblivion Spear. The main bridge was lined with display panels, each one showing the Earth warfront, the final obstacle before the fleet could unleash its assault. The officer at the tactical station turned. "Admiral, all battle groups are in position. First wave will reach Sol in 8 hours." Nyros observed the approach paths in silence. His clawed fingers tapped absently against the arm of his chair. "Something is wrong," the officer frowned. "Sir?" Nyros gestured toward the system scans. "Look at their fleet." The officer studied the data. "They're holding position. No counterattack, no emergency response." Nyros's expression darkened. "They should be scrambling. They should be fortifying their last defenses. Instead, they're waiting." The officer's voice wavered. "Sir, could it be a trap?" Nyros's gaze lingered on the silent fleet of Earth. "Not a trap," he murmured. "A statement." He turned sharply. "Contact the Council. We need additional reconnaissance before proceeding." The communications officer flinched. "Sir, the Council's response is clear. Full engagement. No delays." Nyros's expression remained neutral, but his grip tightened. "They want a war," he muttered. His second-in-command, a Royan officer with scarred scales, stepped forward. "Then we give them one." Nyros watched the cold blue dot of Earth at the center of the displays. "They think this will be like every war before." His jaw tensed. They don't know what they're walking into. The command bunker was at full operational readiness. Every station, every interface, every tactical readout glowed with the imminent arrival of the largest invasion fleet ever gathered. Ward stood at the main viewport, watching the fleet deployments in orbit. "The question is," he muttered, "how long we can hold." Voss stepped beside him, arms crossed. "Long enough?" Vex approached. "They're bringing the Council's entire military arm. They'll keep coming until we're gone." Voss turned to him, his voice low, unwavering. "Then we'll have to make sure they don't come back." His gaze fell on the laser display, where the enemy warships inched ever closer. This wasn't just about defense anymore. This was about ending it. Part 5. The war begins. The invasion fleet surged forward, its shadowed forms blotting out the distant stars. Thousands of ships, their hulls etched with the insignias of 100 species, moved as one. The Galactic Council had brought its full strength, a force meant to crush resistance before it had time to breathe. Inside the Oblivion Spear, Admiral Nyros stood at the command bridge, watching the tactical projections of Earth's defenses. Laser plasma displays traced the incoming engagement paths, mapping potential weaknesses in the planet's orbital formations. He had expected Earth to panic, to scramble their fleet in a desperate attempt to meet the attack head-on. But they hadn't moved. His fingers drummed against the armrest, a slow, deliberate rhythm. "Why are they holding?" he muttered. His second-in-command, a Royan officer, glanced at the readouts. "Perhaps they've accepted the inevitable." Nyros frowned. That wasn't it." "They aren't surrendering," he said, his voice sharp. "They're waiting." Commander Alexander Voss stood at the reinforced observation deck, overlooking Earth's sky. The laser screens traced the enemy's approach, red markers multiplying by the second. Captain Elias Ward adjusted his tactical headset, scanning the fleet readouts. "They'll be in range in 5 minutes. No deviation." Lieutenant Dorian Vex watched the formation patterns, his gaze narrowing. "They're advancing too cleanly. No staggered waves. No scouting attempts. They're confident." Voss exhaled through his nose. "They think this is a siege." Ward raised a brow. "And it isn't?" Voss turned to him. It's an execution." He shifted to the command console, sending a direct transmission to all stations. "All units, stand by. No engagement until my order." Across the orbital grid, Earth's defenses remained cold, unmoving. The Council fleet surged closer, weapons locked, shields at full capacity. Nyros leaned forward in his chair. "Begin the first barrage." From the frontline vessels, lances of plasma and hyperkinetic rounds streaked toward Earth's outer defenses. Explosions flared against the planetary barrier arrays, sending shockwaves rippling through orbital space. The defense grid held, no counterfire, no retaliation. Nyros's brow furrowed. "Why aren't they—" Then he saw it. The fleet markers on his tactical display shifted. One by one, Earth's warships appeared from their darkened positions, emerging from the shadowed pockets of the orbital field. Not scrambling, not reacting, lying in wait. His eyes widened. "It's a trap." Voss's voice cut through every comm channel. "Engage!" The silence erupted into chaos. From the orbital docks, Earth's hidden warships ignited their drives. The ironclad Dawn, leading the first strike group, speared through the alien front line, its forward cannons tearing into the unsuspecting vanguard. Ward's voice crackled over the link. "Target their formation points. Break their cohesion." Swarms of combat drones poured from concealed launch bays, striking critical weak points in the Council's fleet. Ships spiraled out of formation, their comms disrupted, their maneuvers sluggish. The Resolute Aegis, Earth's experimental flagship, fired its electromagnetic disruption array, shattering the coordination between the enemy's leading squadrons. Nyros gritted his teeth as his displays flashed red with failure alerts. "They planned for this," his second-in-command growled. "They knew we'd come." Nyros turned sharply. "Reform our lines! Get the battleships forward! We outnumber them! Push through!" The Council's warships, though reeling, began to adjust. The Capital-class dreadnoughts moved forward, unleashing heavy payloads of fusion ordnance toward Earth's primary fleet positions. Vex swore as a defensive station took a direct hit, its structure splintering apart in a cascade of debris. "Enemy heavy units pressing in," Vex called out. "We're losing ground near the upper orbital corridor." Voss didn't hesitate. "All long-range artillery platforms, shift fire, hit their command vessels." On the ground, the planetary railgun platforms came to life, their barrels pivoting upward. In a single coordinated strike, they fired. The Council's command ships, still organizing their countermaneuvers, took the full force of the bombardment. Nyros staggered as the Oblivion spear shuddered violently. Warning sirens blared through the bridge. "Admiral!" an officer shouted. "The fleet is breaking. Our command links are failing." Nyros gripped the railing, eyes locked onto the laser display. His strategy was unraveling. Earth wasn't just fighting back. They were dismantling him. The Galactic Council watched the battle feed in stunned silence. Kranos' face contorted in fury. This is impossible." The Farron delegate sat motionless, watching the display with cold understanding. "They were never weak," he murmured. "We just never looked close enough." The Council leader's voice was quiet. "Nyros will not hold the line." A murmur spread through the chamber. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council was afraid. Back in orbit, the Oblivion spear was listing, its armor scorched, its weapons faltering. Nyros gritted his teeth. "Full retreat!" His second-in-command turned, stunned. "Sir?" Nyros's voice was steel. "We're beaten. Pull back." Across the battlefield, the Council's forces began withdrawing, their once dominant armada fractured. From the ironclad Dawn, Ward watched the retreating fleet. "Should we pursue?" Voss exhaled, watching the display. "No." Vex turned. "They'll come back." Voss nodded, his expression unreadable. "They will." The Council had come to crush Earth. Instead, they had left in disgrace. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The invincible order of the Council's military dominance had been broken. In the command bunker, Voss stood before the planetary strategic display, hands clasped behind his back. Ward approached. "We've won the battle." Voss's gaze remained on the map. "Not the war." Vex stepped forward. "What do we do now?" Voss turned to face them. "We take the fight to them." Part 6. The counteroffensive begins. The Galactic Council's fleet had retreated, its commanders shaken, its forces fractured. But on Earth, no one celebrated. Inside the command bunker, Commander Alexander Voss stood before the strategic display, watching the last of the Council's warships vanish beyond the solar system's edge. The battle was over. The war had just begun. Captain Elias Ward leaned against the console, scanning the aftermath. "They won't make the same mistakes." Lieutenant Dorian Vex folded his arms. "Next time, they won't stop until Earth is ash." Voss didn't respond immediately. He studied the tactical layout, where the Galactic Empire's territory stretched across the stars. "We're not waiting for them," he said at last. His voice was steady, deliberate. "We take the fight to them." A hushed silence filled the chamber. The delegates, once confident, now uneasy, watched the battle recordings in grim disbelief. The leader of the council, a being with a luminous exoskeleton, spoke first. "How could this happen?" General Kranos, his jaw tight with frustration, stood abruptly. "Nyros failed." Across the room, the Farron delegate remained still. Number We failed. All eyes turned toward him. "We assumed them weak," the Farron continued, voice measured. "Now we must ask, what else have we assumed incorrectly?" Silence. Then a new voice, cold and unyielding. "They will come for us." Every head turned. The shadowed figure at the far end of the chamber leaned forward, hands folded beneath the cloak of their rank. "Earth does not seek survival. It seeks dominance." A ripple of discomfort spread across the room. "Then we prepare," the leader finally declared. "The full might of the Council must be brought to bear." The Council war machine, once thought unnecessary for a lesser species, was being mobilized in full. In the underground complex, Voss, Ward, and Vex stood around the laser display, the glowing map of the galaxy now focused on the Galactic Council's core systems. Vex tapped the display. "They'll expect a retaliatory strike on their border worlds." "They'd be right," Ward added. "Hitting their supply lines weakens them." Voss shook his head. "We go deeper." Both men turned toward him. "We don't harass their borders," Voss continued. "We strike the heart of their command." Ward frowned. "Irindra Prime?" "That's suicide." Voss's gaze was unwavering. "Not if they never see us coming." Silence settled over the table. Vex finally exhaled. "You have a plan." Voss nodded. Irindra Prime, the Galactic Council's capital, was a fortress of bureaucracy and military oversight. It was the nexus of their governance, the place where fleets were organized, where resources were allocated, where decisions of war and peace were made. Attacking it directly was impossible, unless it wasn't. "Their defenses are built for invasions," Voss said. "Large-scale fleets, planetary sieges, not for a surgical strike." Vex folded his arms. "You're talking infiltration." Voss nodded. "A strike team, small, undetectable. We don't destroy their fleet, we take control of their command infrastructure." Ward ran a hand down his face. "You want to sever the head of the beast before it fully turns on us?" Voss's expression didn't waver. "If we don't, they'll drown us in a war of attrition. We don't have time for that." A silence stretched between them, heavy but not with hesitation. Finally, Ward exhaled. "All right, how do we pull this off?" Earth's clandestine warship, the Phantom Veil, was unlike anything the galaxy had encountered. A stealth cruiser built for infiltration, its exterior absorbed and refracted sensor scans, rendering it functionally invisible against most detection grids. It would carry a team of specialists, chosen for their ability to navigate the Council's command networks. On board the Phantom Veil, Voss stood in the briefing chamber addressing the assembled strike team. "This isn't a battle," he told them. "It's an extraction mission. We infiltrate their capital, sabotage their command systems, and leave before they realize what's happened." He let that sink in. No heroics, no prolonged fights. We get in, cut the nerve, and get out. Vex leaned against the bulkhead. "And if something goes wrong?" Voss's expression was cold. "Then we make sure they regret ever pushing us to this." The room was silent. Then Ward cracked his knuckles. "I always wanted to see the inside of Arindra Prime." Voss allowed a rare smirk. "You'll get your chance." Inside the surveillance hub overlooking the Council's capital, a board security officer skimmed through endless incoming logs. The screens tracked every incoming ship, every departing vessel, every minor fluctuation in planetary defense matrices. Nothing unusual, nothing unexpected. Until a single entry flickered across the logs. A supply freighter, marked as cleared for docking, except its registration had been wiped. The officer frowned. He reached toward the alert panel, just as his console went black. The room plunged into darkness. By the time the lights flickered back, the supply freighter was already inside the docking bay. Beneath the cloak of false credentials and stolen access codes, the Phantom Veil had entered Arindra Prime's restricted airspace. From within the ship's concealed hold, the strike team moved into position. Voss's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Keep it quiet. We have one shot at this." Ward adjusted his disguised armor, blending seamlessly with the station's personnel uniforms. Vex tapped into the station's data grid, rerouting security protocols to mask their presence. The moment they stepped onto the station's decks, they were ghosts. Admiral Neros stood in his private quarters, reviewing the fleet's reorganization orders. The Council was preparing for a second war front, reinforcing the border systems in anticipation of another Earth assault. His command console flickered, a minor data desync, a common occurrence in the bureaucratic nightmare of wartime logistics. He didn't notice. Not yet. But deep within Arindra Prime's command network, the strike team was already at work. And by the time the Council realized what had happened, it would be too late. Part 7. Sabotage in the Shadows. The air inside the Galactic Council's command hub was stale, thick with the tension of logistics officers and military strategists working tirelessly to coordinate the Empire's war machine. Arindra Prime's nerve center never slept. Its laser plasma displays pulsed with fleet movements, planetary resource allocations, and encrypted battle reports. No one noticed the intruders moving through the dim service corridors beneath their feet. Commander Alexander Voss, Captain Elias Ward, and Lieutenant Dorian Vex led the strike team through a maze of maintenance tunnels, their boots silent against the reinforced flooring. The layout of the station had been committed to memory. Every checkpoint, every camera blind spot, every emergency hatch that could serve as an exit. Ward whispered through his comm. "Security density is higher than expected." Vex, working on a terminal, didn't look up. "They're on edge. Last battle rattled them." Voss gave a sharp nod. "Then we make sure they stay that way." A high-ranking logistics officer, adorned in the traditional shimmering robes of the Council's administrative branch, reviewed the latest fleet reallocation orders. "Why has the supply output dropped in the Armari sector?" His tone was clipped, impatient. A subordinate tapped hurriedly at a display. "Unclear. No reported raids, no planetary unrest." "Then find out." But the problem wasn't the front lines. It was already inside Arindra Prime's core systems. Vex worked swiftly, fingers moving across his portable hacking module, feeding false status reports into the command network. To the rest of the galaxy, everything still looked functional. But in reality, the Council's communication relays were beginning to fracture. Ward motioned toward a reinforced doorway. "That gets us to the fleet command protocols." Voss checked the hallway, motion sensors disabled, patrols diverted. We're running out of time. Move! They slipped inside, navigating past towering data cores pulsing with encrypted information. At the center of the chamber, a massive interface console glowed with fleet deployment data. "This is it," Vex muttered. "Everything. Supply chains, reinforcement schedules, fleet movements. If we corrupt this, they're flying blind." Voss placed a small device against the console. "Then let's cut the Empire's leash." With a final input sequence, the device began injecting false intelligence into the Council's war network. At that same moment, alarms blared across Arindra Prime. On the upper levels, officers scrambled as command systems flickered. Fleet projections vanished, reappeared in the wrong locations, or showed impossible maneuvers. A defense coordinator slammed his hands on the console. "What's happening?" "Unknown," a technician stammered. "Data corruption. Fleet control is unresponsive." The Supreme Commander, a figure draped in regal authority, turned to his aides. "Find the source and lock down the station." Voss's earpiece crackled. "They're on to us," Ward said. Vex swore under his breath. "We need an exit. Now." Voss turned toward the emergency access tunnels, but the moment they stepped into the corridor, security forces descended. Energy blasts tore through the air. Voss ducked behind a bulkhead, returning fire with cold efficiency. Ward took out a guard before he could reach his communicator, while Vex sent a jamming signal to delay reinforcements. A security officer barked into his radio. "We have hostiles in the command core. Section 7, deploying countermeasures." Voss shot him in the leg, then grabbed his fallen access key. "We're going through the maintenance shafts," Ward reloaded. "That leads to the hangars." Vex sealed the control room doors behind them. "Good. Let's steal a ride home." The team moved fast, weaving through tight industrial corridors as alarm klaxons screamed across the station. A security detachment, more coordinated than the last, cut them off near a transport bay. Ward's expression darkened. "We're running out of exits." Vex checked the system logs. "One ship's leaving soon. We can override its boarding protocols." Voss nodded. "Make it happen." Vex sent a signal, forcing the ship's loading ramp to descend. But before they could move, more guards appeared. A rapid exchange of fire erupted. Ward downed 2 soldiers with clean shots. Voss, moving with calculated precision, eliminated the squad leader before he could call reinforcements. Vex barely avoided a plasma round, throwing himself into cover. "I really hate these guys." "Move!" Voss barked. They reached the transport just as station defenses activated, turrets pivoting toward them. Ward spun toward Vex. "Fly this thing or we're dead." Vex slid into the pilot's seat, overriding the manual controls. "Hold on." The ship's thrusters roared to life, launching from the docking bay as council fighters scrambled in pursuit. From the station's control tower, an officer barked, "Unidentified vessel departing. Intercept immediately." The pursuing interceptors gained ground fast, locking onto the stolen transport. Vex swerved, narrowly avoiding the first salvo of plasma bolts. "Little help?" Ward manned the rear gun turret, unleashing a barrage that crippled 2 pursuers. Voss monitored the displays. "We need a distraction." Vex's fingers danced across the controls. "On it!" The transport suddenly pitched upward, releasing a series of decoy signals, false energy signatures that scrambled enemy sensors. For a crucial few seconds, the pursuing fighters hesitated. Voss saw the opening. "Now!" The transport burst into open space, accelerating toward the jump point. The final pursuing fighter locked onto them, just as Ward fired a well-placed shot, rupturing its stabilizers. The craft spiraled out of control, detonating in a burst of flame. Vex punched in the jump coordinates. "We're clear!" With a final burst of acceleration, the stolen transport vanished into the depths of space. Inside Arindra Prime's command center, the Council's military leaders watched the destruction of their data infrastructure in stunned silence. Fleet projections remained corrupted, supply chains falsified, critical messages lost in the chaos. The Supreme Commander's face was unreadable. Find them. Wherever they run, find them. The Council's greatest strategic asset had been crippled in a single night. But worse, the humans had done it from inside their very walls. The stolen transport had rendezvoused with the Phantom Veil, and now Voss, Ward, and Vex stood in the war room reviewing the mission data. Ward exhaled. We just changed the course of this war. Voss studied the display, voice calm, firm, unshaken. We just took their eyes and ears. Vex leaned back, arms crossed. So, what's next? Voss didn't hesitate. We take their throat. The war room aboard the Phantom Veil was quiet, but the air carried a sense of inevitable motion. The laser plasma displays flickered with the latest intelligence. Arindra Prime in chaos, its network crippled from within. Commander Alexander Voss stood at the center, his gaze sweeping across the data. The Council's fleet coordination was shattered, but their military might remained intact. A wounded beast, cornered but not yet slain. Captain Elias Ward leaned over a console, scanning the intercepted transmissions. They're still trying to re-establish control. They don't even know which orders are real anymore. Lieutenant Dorian Vex exhaled through his nose. Good. But we both know they won't stay confused forever. Voss nodded. That's why we don't give them time. He tapped a control, shifting the display. We've taken their eyes, their ears. Now we take their throat. A new target appeared. A Council dreadnought, the Judicator Prime, stationed at a remote logistics command station on the edge of their empire. Unlike the political seat at Arindra Prime, this facility wasn't just a nerve center, it was a weapon housing their last functioning fleet coordination system. Ward frowned. That ship's too well defended. Even crippled, the Council has enough firepower left to burn half the sector before they go down. Voss's expression remained unchanged. That's why we're not attacking it directly. He turned to Vex. Can you infiltrate their security protocols again? Vex shook his head. Not like last time. They'll have reinforced everything. But I can feed them false emergency alerts. If we hit the right pressure points, we can force them into moving their fleet away from the station. Voss looked back at the display. Then that's what we do. We don't fight their strength. We make them fight where they're weak. Deep within the Council's remaining war chambers, Supreme Commander Tervozal stood before his officers, his expression dark. Status? He demanded. A communications officer, his luminous skin flickering with stress, shook his head. The network remains unreliable. Fleet coordination is fragmented. Most of our long-range commands are still looping outdated orders. Zal's jaw tightened. Then restore local command authority. Dispatch fleet assets to the outer sectors immediately. An intelligence officer hesitated. Sir, there's a problem. Multiple distress calls from Sector 12. Unconfirmed reports of human attacks. Zal's fingers curled. Then why hasn't our defense network responded? The officer's throat bobbed. Because our defense network is offline. Zal's breath slowed. That was the trap. As the Council scrambled to reassign its crippled forces, the Phantom Veil and a small strike fleet emerged from slip space near the command station. Not a direct assault, that would be suicide. Instead, they released covert infiltration units, slipping into the facility's lower docking bays. Inside the corridors, the strike team moved swiftly. Every objective was clear. Disable local defense systems, seize the Judicator Prime's command core, and leave before reinforcements could arrive. Ward led the charge, neutralizing 2 guards before they could raise an alert. Voss and Vex followed, sweeping into the command uplink chamber. A single Council technician, unaware of the intrusion, muttered under his breath as he worked to restore systems. Vex walked up behind him, yanked his access badge, and knocked him unconscious with a single strike. Don't mind us. Voss was already planting the override virus. Once this uploads, their fleet is permanently severed. Ward checked his heads-up display. 2 minutes before their response teams get here. Vex's fingers danced across the controls. "Give me 60 seconds." By the time the Council realized the attack was real, it was already over. The strike team extracted, vanishing into space as the Judicator Prime's systems collapsed. Fleet transmissions looped false data, defense grids deactivated, and the last remnants of the Council's war machine fractured beyond recovery. Zal received the final report on a failing data terminal. "The Judicator Prime has fallen." Zal's claws dug into the surface before him. "Then it's over." The Galactic Council was no more. Weeks passed. The war ended not with a final battle, but with silence. Council warships, now leaderless and blind, scattered like debris on the solar wind. Some tried to fight on, but without support infrastructure, their power withered. Others surrendered, unwilling to die for an empire already dead. Earth stood victorious, not because of brute strength, but because they had outmaneuvered an empire that once ruled the stars. On the bridge of the Phantom Veil, Voss watched the final transmissions from the Council's failing fleets. Ward stepped beside him. "So, what now?" Voss exhaled slowly. "Now we see if the galaxy is ready for peace." Vex, lounging against a terminal, smirked. "And if it's not?" Voss's gaze hardened. "Then they'll learn, just like the Council did." The stars stretched before them, untouched and endless. Humanity, once seen as insignificant, had rewritten the balance of power. And now, the galaxy knew one undeniable truth. Earth had never been the underdog. It had simply been waiting.